Hello, it's Arran here at the Battle of Preston Pans Museum with the 16th video update of our What If interactive wargame campaign, imagining what might have happened in 1745 to 6 if the strategic decisions for the Jacobite army were taken by popular vote. Now this time we're going into the second half of March 1746 to see if the stalemate can finally be broken. Let's start by looking at the situation in the south of Scotland then, where the dramatic events of the last video took place when Colonel Durand and his mixed force of Northern English and Southern Scottish militias stormed Berwick-upon-Tweed successfully. Now, you all responded with a mix of shock, horror and indifference to this event, some of you believing that actually taking losses in the assault and then bottling himself up in Berwick, Durand was essentially taking himself out of the campaign. Others sensed that not only is this a psychological blow for the Jacobites, but a potential danger too, and our Redcoat forces responded with joy to the idea that they could now start potentially feeding troops into Scotland by sea, using Berwick as a potential operational base. Now, over in Glasgow, the Marquis of Tullibardine has a small Jacobite army, mix of Highland and Lowland units. We gave a number of options as to what people could vote for Tullibardine to do next, including moving back to Edinburgh to either take a defensive posture or simply strengthen all of the Jacobite garrisons to prevent something similar happening elsewhere. Another option was to continue on Tullibardine's intended route, which took him out of Glasgow, installing garrisons through the southwest of Scotland to prevent any further enemy recruitment. But the actual decision was that Tullibardine would march through the borders and head straight, as fast as he could, to Berwick-upon-Tweed, not to assault it and try and retake it because it didn't have the numbers, but instead to blockade it in order to prevent Durand from doing anything proactive. So this is our situation over in Berwick after Tullibardine takes up position. The garrison under Durand there in the fortress at the bottom right, with 2 standard-sized units and 2 small-sized units of militia. And as you can see, an arc blockading them from the Scottish side of the border, 2 small units on the coastal side, the main position at Mordrington, at the Tower House there, and a further unit posted down at Paxton by the Tweed, giving the Jacobites an arc controlling all potential routes that either anything could get into Berwick or that Durand could attempt to come out. The British forces, they have decided that they were not going to attack these positions. Durand has been ordered to hold in Berwick. So our British force, that team has decided not to take any action. So are we settling into a stalemate in Scotland again, just as we have been in England? And speaking of which, this is our situation in the southeast of England, where the 2 principal campaigning forces are still concentrated. George II in London has a mixed force of elite guards, the surviving regular regiments from the previous campaigns, militia forces, and those Hessian soldiers we saw in action back at Tunbridge. There's a couple of outlying militia posts on the roads north and south as well, and they're pretty secure there in the capital. Although, as the weeks go on, George II is burning through the political capital that he'd gained by his victory at Sandridge, because there are questions being asked as to why he's not able to do more to end this conflict quicker. Meanwhile, to the west, Charles Edward has linked up with the French, as we know, and now is occupying the area between Oxford and Reading. And unfortunately for us, I suppose, they're in almost perfect balance with the forces in London, which means at the moment the deadlock is still struck here. Neither of these forces seem inclined to move, and they're only likely to move if they are forced to do so by events elsewhere. Charles Edward has been informed of the situation in the south of Scotland, but he has not yet heard of the details of the fall of Berwick. It will only be a matter of days, however. Whether or not he considers that serious enough to influence his campaign down here is unclear. I suspect he'll struggle to persuade the French that they should be moving too distant from the capital or the coast. Now, during our campaign so far, our naval resources have only been treated in a fairly philosophical way. Naval resources have had to be used by the British force when it's needed to evacuate troops by sea or transport reinforcements from Europe. And that has had an influence over dice rolls that have, for example, determined whether or not French troops can land. At this stage in the campaign, though, it's become clear that actually we need to take the naval situation more seriously, and so we have been looking into that. The British fleet had been brought into the Thames in order to disembark a lot of Marines to support George II's land campaign defending London. They were then put back out to sea to blockade the French ports on the north coast, and it was during that time, if you'll recall, that Chatham Dockyard was destroyed by the French army in a raid. Now the French have finally decided that they need to clear the British fleet out of the Channel in order to send supplies and reinforcements to the Jacobites and to Richelieu. So, after a long period of consolidation, the French have decided to postpone their planned expedition to North America to recover Louisbourg, and they have assigned the Duke of Anville a fleet in the mission to secure the English Channel. So the French had consolidated their fleet at Le Havre, and then in early March had prepared to move out against the British fleet, which had moved away from the blockaded ports towards the Downs and consolidated there. Eventually, the conditions on the 26th of March enabled the French to sail up the Channel to its narrow neck between Dungeness and the north coast of France. This would be the third Battle of Dungeness. Two previous big naval engagements had taken place there in the mid and late 17th century. Will this be a great British naval victory, or the French victory that secures the future of the Jacobite cause? As we see the French flagship slowly moving out of Le Havre, I'll just point out that although our previous tabletop engagements have all been fought to black powder rules, to take the battle to the seas, we've taken the Black Seas rules from Warlord games as well, and of course the ships are all Black Seas vessels as well. Now, we decided to keep this a fairly even engagement as the first naval battle of the campaign. Neither of our two admirals had any experience of fleet actions on the Black Seas rules. There was just a quick pilot ship-on-ship action to test the rules out before the battle commenced. We also didn't use any nation-specific amendments to the core rules, and we also decided that obviously this is the mid-18th century, and so there will be no talk of carronades here. Here we have the British fleet, painted up by Dave Smith, fantastic vessels led by the Royal Sovereign, sailing out to recover the Royal Navy's prestige and get some revenge, perhaps, for the burning of Chatham. The British fleet decided to stay together and try and advance against the French in a single line, whilst the French decided they were going to take a different approach, splitting their force into two separate squadrons. We see an overview here of the northern sector of the battlefield, the left wing and centre of the British line there extending out, whilst the French northernmost squadron, the right squadron from the French perspective, begins moving across obliquely towards the centre of the British line. The British fleet has marginally stronger firepower than the French, so their intention is to try and use the wind to get round the British line here and split it here as well, so that they don't have to face all of the firepower of the Royal Navy at any one time. Initially, the French have the advantage because the wind is in their favour and they're able to move in good formation, a steady advance, exactly as they'd planned. But it is the Royal Navy who opens the battle with the first broadside as the French squadron comes around the flank of the British line. So as you see, partly thanks to the wind direction and partly due to some navigational errors by certain captains I won't name, we have a quite confusing battle evolving where About half of the Royal Naval Fleet is not able to engage with any of the French ships, whilst at the other end of the line, the French left squadron is able to bring a lot of firepower to bear on several ships that have become separated due to one or two of them turning into the wind at an inopportune moment. However, the French themselves have decided to keep at full sails with full wind behind them, and that means that actually some of the French ships are moving so fast that they're not able to maximise the advantage of firepower they have as British ships pass under their guns. Nevertheless, there are several Royal Naval ships that do manage to come between two French vessels with superior firepower on both sides, taking a terrible battering as the French vessels sweep past majestically. It's not all one way, though. Here is an example of some pretty heroic sailing, very carefully managing to navigate through between the French lines and to provide raking fire into two French vessels simultaneously. The Royal Sovereign moves in to try and rescue the situation on the far end of the British line, bringing its formidable firepower to bear on the French and alleviate some of the pressure on those isolated British ships. And the first French casualty of the battle, the Diamant, is utterly destroyed, smashed apart by those heavier broadsides from the Royal Sovereign. Supporting the larger vessels, there are a number of frigates on both sides, and they are zipping in and out and causing mischief where they can. Here we see the line of two Royal Navy frigates, the Success that has got through first, and the Fox, which is coming in behind it now, both daring the running the gauntlet of the French broadsides. You can also see the French frigate, the Prince Charles, here at the top left, which is now moving back into the fray, having got so far ahead of the rest of the squadron that it's actually turned about and sailed back into the action from the direction of the Royal Navy's initial advance. In this confused melee with ships coming and passing in opposite directions to one another, there's all sorts of potential, it turns out, not only for confusion, but also disaster. One of the British ships is forced to strike its colours under the weight of those French broadsides surrounding it, but with its own rudder shot away, one of the French vessels is unable to steer clear enough to avoid entangling itself in the surrendered British ship. Supported by HMS Success, Royal Sovereign comes around, unleashing a devastating fire onto the entangled French ship and sending it into the seas, locked still with the carcass of the surrendered British vessel beside it. Whilst this is happening over on the French left, the French right has become entangled with the centre of the Royal Navy line. Here, as you can see from the plan, fire is king. As the two fleets came into range of each other and began opening fire, both sides managed to strike significant hits upon one another, and fires broke out on two vessels, one French, one British. As you can see, where the two lines have collided, the ships have come into close contact, but quite a lot of British vessels are still unable to bring their guns to bear against the French. Meanwhile, the French are sailing so close together on this trajectory that the fire on board one has spread to the Monarch. The central area of the battlefield therefore becomes a swirling area of smoke and flames. Two French ships ablaze and a British vessel too. And at this point, the attention of all of the crews is diverted into trying to get those ships under control and get those fires out. For the moment, at least, that is the priority of the French and British crews in the centre. So here's the situation a few phases of play later. The three grey markers marking the two French, one British ships that have been wrecked during the action. The wrecks providing an area of cover that has prevented the Royal Navy, particularly the Royal Sovereign, from being able to follow up with the French left squadron, which has got round into the rear. They've been joined by much of the right squadron, in fact, which has had to focus too much on putting the fires out to get into a better battlefield position. And one ship that had been badly damaged and had lots of command and control trouble during this phase of play has ended up isolated out here on its own. As you can see, a large portion of the Royal Navy's fleet is still in play, although in bad order. They are now, however, starting to move into a position from which they will gain the advantage of the wind and might cause some serious problems for the surviving French ships. Just moving things along, you can see that the French ships have slowed their pace and are trying to get back into a formation. The British ships are having a bit more difficulty getting into a favourable wind position. The ship down there at the bottom right that's pointing in the wrong direction entirely, that is the vessel that had been on fire in the centre, and that has just taken a little bit longer to get back under control. Meanwhile, two of the British ships are attempting to sail towards the French squadron to prevent it from being able to reform effectively. As the first of those vessels comes on, however, it is exposed to French broadsides that are actually, in this case, far too effective, because it means fire breaks out on the British ship, which is on a collision course with the French squadron. All eyes now, and rulers, are on whether that British ship will be able to get through that line, or if it will become entangled and ensnared, or even collide with the French vessels passing in front of it. On both sides, desperate evasive manoeuvres take place, and the Royal Navy ship is able to get through the French line without colliding. But as it comes through, the blazing inferno that's developing on its decks spreads to the sails of adjacent French vessels. HMS Edinburgh has now become a massive accidental fire ship, sailing straight into the heart of the French fleet, setting fire to the Castor to its right, and setting fire to the French flagship Le Tonon. And of course, now the priority of all of these crews is desperately trying to put out the deck fires in the hope of rescuing their ships and keeping them in a seaworthy condition, certainly preventing a devastating explosion. Of course, the burning French flagship draws the attention of Royal Sovereign and all the other Royal Naval ships in the area, desperate to trap and kill the powerful French vessel. Whilst that's happening over there, the sight of the burning ship, of course, has encouraged the other French ships to believe the battle is irretrievably lost. Some, therefore, head the safest direction out to the southeast. The Castor, once it gets its fire under control, however, is very concerned about being cut off by the Royal Navy, and so it joins the Intrépide and heads off to safety in the direction of the east. This means that even though the French haven't lost that many ships, they have lost their flagship, and the survivors have headed off in two different directions. So although in this scrappy naval engagement the Royal Navy has not destroyed the French fleet, they have successfully dispersed it. They're now able to renew their blockade of northern French ports, and the French, unless there's a dramatic intervention, are unlikely now to be able to feed regular, reliable supplies and reinforcements to the army of the Jacobites in the south of England. Unless the French are able to break out from their harbours and reconcentrate and fight another engagement, this has to be taken seriously by Richelieu and Charles Edward over in Reading. Can the Jacobite and French armies continue to exist so deep into England, so close to London, without making any further forward motion? Or would they be better trying to withdraw into a consolidated heartland and rebuild their strength? Is it going to be all or nothing? Are the Jacobites now going to have to move towards the capital in one final thrust? Or will they play it safe and consider withdrawing to the north? All remains to be seen. Maybe, just maybe though, the decisive battle to save George II's throne has been fought at sea. So, as the bells of St. Paul's ring in triumph and George II inflates the news of his victory at sea, the decisions get passed back to our councils of war. Thanks for watching. We hope to be back very soon.